Time to revisit some old friends. So, Doctor Who Big Finish time, and this turned into a slightly bigger project than I originally intended it to be because I didn't do my research before giving options to my patrons to decide which stories to vote on. So, long story made short, I had purchased a number of basically all of the second season of the Fourth Doctor Adventures from Big Finish with Tom Baker back as the Doctor. And that this season also features Mary Tam returning as Romana 1. Now, I had just picked a story, actually, I think maybe two stories, and plus one other thing for my patrons to vote on. And the one that they picked was the Dalek contract. Now, because I'm dumb, also allergic to research, I did not realize that I had basically put up, and then they had selected the first half of a more or less two-part story that's also a continuation from a previous basically two-part story. And so I listened to it, I finished, and I'm like, I know I'm coming into the middle of something, and I was right. So what I'm actually going to review now is basically four stories. Officially, I consider it to be two because two out of these four aren't complete. Without the one that immediately follows or immediately precedes it. And there is a sort of a thematic through line for these four. So I'm covering a little more than half of the Fourth Doctor Adventures Season 2. So this means that the stories that I'm covering are The Sands of Life, The War with the Lan, or Lan. Oh, I can't remember how they pronounce it now. It was Lan. War with the Lan. Again, should have checked that. Research. And then that was followed up by the Dalek contract, the one that I actually tried to do as its own thing and didn't work. And then finally the final phase. So, let's start talking with the characters, because the characters are the highlight and they're also the reason I came to this. So, obviously, Tom Baker back as the Fourth Doctor, he hasn't missed a step. I won't lie, it took me a little bit of time to get used to just the fact that he sounds older. Not that he sounds like wizened or decrepit or anything, but the tone and quality of his voice has aged. It has changed. I kind of went through the same thing when I watched the animated Batman things, The Return of the Caped Crusaders, that brought Adam West back to voice Batman again. He's still got it, absolutely, but his voice is not identical to what it used to be. So it takes a little while to sort of get used to that. Also, it's basically the same case with Mary Tam. Unfortunately, and I hadn't realized this when I bought these, but again, this I did do research and check. The unfortunately late Mary Tam. She passed away. I had missed this, but she had passed away in 2013. Excuse me. Or actually, no, she might have passed away in 2012. Well, I know these were recorded in 2012 and released in 2013. She had cancer, and she actually already knew that when she agreed to do these. So she was sick, but she still wanted to do these, and she came in, and it takes absolutely nothing away from her performance that she is not in good health. And I have a fondness for Romana 1. I think part of it probably has to do with the first Fourth Doctor story that I saw that I really loved was The Pirate Planet, which featured that version of Romana. I know a lot of people tend to have a preference for the Lalla Ward version of Romana 2, basically. And I don't dislike Romana 2, but there is definitely a distinctly different flavor. There's a slightly more antagonistic feel between Romana 1 and the Doctor, whereas Romana 2, it's a bit more of that playfulness. They're more at ease with each other, to put it simply. Whereas there's just a little bit of a different quality to that interaction, and it was one that I was happy to hear again because, this version of Romana only got that one season on the show, the Key to Time season, so it was nice to get more. The other thing that's sort of the major through line on these four stories is the villain, because he recurs across all four of these. Now, these aren't actually back to back to back to back. If you were to listen to all of season 2 of Fourth Doctor Adventures, these come in. So first episode is standalone, then it's Sands of Time War with the Lan, then it's 2 standalone episodes, and then it's Dalek Contract Final Phase. So he's kind of spread out across the season a little bit. But it's a villain by the name of Cuthbert, who is voiced by David Warner. Oh, I love me some David Warner. If that name sounds vaguely familiar, he's really well known for doing an awful lot of villains. Some of his most iconic, he was the villain in Time Bandits. He was the main villain besides the Master Control Program in Tron. He was the sort of the henchman to Billy Zane's character in Titanic. That's David Warner. He's great, and he's also really good in this. He also has a sidekick, basically a character named Mr. Doric, who is also quite good and is with him through most of his stuff. They're kind of a little bit of a double act. But let's talk about these stories in a little more specifics. So first up, with the Sands of Life and War with the Lan, I'm gonna treat it as one thing because they really are a two-parter. They separate them out as if they're two different stories. They're really not, because neither half is complete without the other. And it's not even like, oh, well, here's a story and then we do a cliffhanger leading it. No, story's not finished unless you listen to both halves. So what we have going on here is that Cuthbert and his company that he has, which is known as the Conglomerate, which is this massively influential and powerful organization that just has its fingers in everything. The Conglomerate is conducting some experiments out in space, and what they're tinkering with basically ends up accidentally getting kind of sideswiped by these creatures called the Lan, which are they're kind of space whales, but not all about water, actually all about sand. And the space whales end up on Earth in the Sahara Desert, believing this to be their traditional birthing grounds, like salmon swimming upstream to give birth to their young. So that it's that kind of situation. And that's all well and good, except that the energies expelled by these creatures when they give birth is a massive hit of energy. And if the entire Lan population that has arrived, basically, if they all move forward with their birthing cycle, it's actually going to wipe out all the other life on the planet. So that's the situation that we're dealing with, and that's the situation that the Doctor and Romana come in on. And there's a lot of people, with a lot at stake here. So the other major character who's in this particular one is the new president of Earth, who has been newly elected, and she was basically sort of swept in under a protest vote because everybody knows the Conglomerate basically controls everything, and she was the most vocal critic of the Conglomerate, so she was swept into power. But she's brand new to the job, and she's very quickly learning that it's one thing to say, I won't just bend over and give the Conglomerate whatever they want, and then to deal with the reality of, I actually can't tell them no because we kind of depend on them for everything, like military, medicine, the resources we use to just feed the population is not entirely dependent, but is scale tippingly dependent on this one company. So there's a reason that the Conglomerate has this degree of leverage. It's not the sort of political corruption, strong arming you get in a lot of stories, which is usually can often be things like blackmail or extortion. It's not. It's just this company, and Cuthbert in particular, just flexing the muscle that he has, because the company is not. It is that all-reaching. And so, the military has a concern about these things. They consider it a threat. Cuthbert has a personal vendetta against them because they basically screwed up his experiment. Plus, he thinks that maybe if he got a hold of one and had somebody dissect it, they could learn something from it. So that's what's going on here. And this story doesn't really work. And I think the reason it works is not necessarily inherent problems with the story, but I think it was a bad fit for Big Finish. It was a bad fit for an audio medium because ultimately this particular story it's a monster of the week story. It's a story where the primary focus is on the creatures, and when it's a completely audio medium, some of that gets lost right off the bat. Given the fact that, well, it's just these voices. They do end up giving the Lon a voice. Because it can kind of speak, and Romana picks it up, the Doctor doesn't, in Romana's head. But additionally, it also ends up being incredibly repetitious, especially from an audio perspective. I think it might have played better with a visual component, but as an audio, and I feel really bad for Mary Tam in this one, because so much of her dialogue is, "No, you have to listen. Wait, you don't understand," or variants of that. And then for the Lon, honestly, they reminded me of The Wire from The Idiot's Lantern, because I always talk about how much I hate the fact that The Wire basically just keeps going, "Feed me," over and over and over again. And the Lon basically go, "The sands of life. We must reach the sands of life," and variants of that over and over and over and over again. And it's incredibly repetitive. And also, like, for the kind of story it is, it doesn't really support being stretched out across two, halves, for how little actually goes on, especially given that what they do to stretch it out across this time frame is to have basically just have people not communicate well. So, like, there's multiple sections where there's basically things going on where ultimately it breaks down to, "You must listen to me. We won't listen to you. You must listen to me. We won't listen to you. I'm going to tell you anyway. I've heard you, but I still don't believe you." And I'm like, what was the point of the last 5 minutes? Because it got us nowhere. And we've already established that these people aren't going to have their minds changed. So why did we waste 10 minutes continually establishing that? And that happens with multiple characters. It happens with the Lon, it happens with Cuthbert, it happens with the military characters. It's frustratingly repetitive. It's not without redeeming qualities, all as much as I feel bad for Mary Tam for the dialogue she was stuck with. She gives a good performance, and actually all the performances are good. And that is the saving grace, because when we take moments away from the plot and have some more character-centric moments, the interactions between Cuthbert and Doric, and certainly the president character, she's actually quite good. I like her a lot, and I like that that sort of whole thing that's at play with her wanting to fight against the conglomerate, but she really kind of can't. And I actually found it to be a surprisingly interesting and nuanced dynamic. I just wish it hadn't just been a singular aspect in this bigger story, where the bigger story was something that just wasn't great. It felt generic, and it felt like something that they could have gotten away with it in a visual medium with good visuals. Like the clunkiness of the storytelling would have been assisted by a strong visual presentation, and without it, the flaws become a bit more apparent, which again is unfortunate. The next half being the Dalek contract and the final phase, that is better. But because, first of all, let's be honest, the Daleks are kind of a great villain to do in audio medium because they are so immediately distinct, to hear. So it makes them a really good job. And honestly, the Cybermen for kind of the same reason. And I think it's why more often than not, most of the Big Finish stories that I've listened to, not all, but most, seem to involve somebody, usually on the villain end of things, with an odd voice. There's sort of a phantom reverb sound effect, or there's an electronic element to their voice, or, there's a robot character in there somewhere. And because those sorts of things work well in an audio medium, and so the Daleks inherently, I think, work quite well. And so we have interesting continuing tension between, Cuthbert and the Doctor, because now they actually know each other a little bit, and which is actually kind of an interesting point as well, because Cuthbert has a certain degree of frustration because the Doctor doesn't know who he is. And that's to Cuthbert's consternation, because everybody knows who he is. But it's not quite in that petulant level that, like, say, Harry Van Straten, if I'm saying it right this time, I know I said it wrong last time I talked about this episode. Back in Dalek from series 1 of revived Doctor Who it's not quite that level of just childish insistence on his own importance. This guy actually genuinely has a claim to importance, but there's also there's a lot of shades to David Warner's performance as Cuthbert across all of these, that he's oddly relatable, for lack of a better term, and I mean that in personality-wise, not necessarily in his goals or his motivations, which we actually don't find out very much about until the very last story out of these 4 that I'm talking about. But he has kind of this self-made man, I pulled myself up by my own bootstraps feel to him. And like his introductory sentence in the Dalek contract is Mr. Dork comes into his office and he says, the kitchen better be sending up that brown sauce. I tell them every time, no chips without brown sauce. And it's like, it's so weird that a guy this powerful, this rich, with this much influence is obsessing over not having the right dip for his chips. It's it's nice. It's a nice touch, and it makes him much less of the I am in control of everything generic sort of thing that you might expect more from a character in the positions that he's in. And it makes him more interesting to listen to and to hear things play out. We also have new characters introduced in this second story, so I didn't actually talk plot on this one yet. So the way this one works is basically we're picking up on the thread of the experiments that Cuthbert is running, because that was sort of hinted at in that first one, Sands of Time and War with the Lan, and it's picked up on here as we actually see a little bit more about these experiments. So these aren't happening at Earth, these are happening way off somewhere else, and the planets in the vicinity are being basically wrangled by the Daleks, who have entered into a contract with Cuthbert. Yeah, he is pompous enough to think that he could negotiate a workable contract with the Daleks, and it's kind of hilarious. Like, even before things go badly, which, I mean, that's not a spoiler, they're gonna go badly, that Cuthbert is like, he keeps throwing up the term, oh, we have a contract, like a shield. As if it's like he genuinely thinks that the Daleks give a crap about the contract that he got them to agree to. As if he's like, what, you're going to take the Daleks to court? Is that your big plan? Is that what you're going to threaten them with if they don't do what you ask? And it's just, oh, dude, you have no idea what you've gotten yourself into. And that does sort of play out a little bit across as things go. But we've also got sort of planet level resistance from the people who are battling against Cuthbert and his space platform, and obviously they are now having to deal with the Daleks as well. And there's infighting going on there because you have different groups with different personal agendas, things that they want to accomplish sort of separate from that, and they are at odds and they don't like each other, but they kind of have to at least try to set their differences aside if they're going to have even the slightest hope of putting even a dent in what the Daleks and Cuthbert are up to, which the Doctor ends up being the main driving factor in getting those things to start to pull together. It's funny now that I think of it. There's actually a surprising number of stretches in all of these that I'm talking about where the Doctor and Romana are separated. So as much as it was nice to have Mary Tam back, she actually doesn't interact directly with the Doctor as much as I would have thought. Not in these ones anyways. A little bit more in some of the other ones from this season, which I'll talk about at a later date in another video. I forgot to mention K9 is in these as well. John Leeson doing K9, and he's actually quite well used, especially given that he narratively, he's quite well used, because K9, depending on what you have him do, is one of those things that, honestly, a bit like the sonic screwdriver, if you overuse him, he kind of breaks the story. So you have to nerf him just appropriately or isolate him in a certain area so other things can go on elsewhere. And all of that is handled pretty well. In terms of the final phase, there isn't really much I can talk to about that one because the more interesting elements of it get into sort of spoilerish things. I did check, even though it is a closed off story by the time you get through the final phase, the Cuthbert is a character who does reappear in later audios. I may have to track those down, though I'm not going to do that right away. So overall, for this chunk of them, and the Cuthbert-related stories from the season in particular, they are meh to pretty good because Sands of Time War with the Lawn, while not a total stinker, is probably the weakest Big Finish story, spread across those two installments that I've heard so far. It's just not especially great. I wouldn't say avoid it, because the context does kind of be necessary to listen to the Dalek contract in the final phase, which is better. But it is on the weak side. But the other ones are good. But even in the ones that are weaker, David Warner is still really good. The Doctor is still really good. Romana's still really good. K9 is fun and well used. Mr. Doric is good in all of these. And actually, even the supporting cast that are more isolated to the separate stories is all good. So it's all good character work. It's all good performances. It's just a question of whether the story that they're in is working. And in Dalek Contract and the final phase, basically, yeah. In Sands of Life and War with the Lawn, basically, not really. So I think I'll wrap it up there then. Consider it a soft recommendation. I think it depends on your own personal fondness for the Fourth Doctor and or Romana 1. If you have the same fondness for these characters that I do, it's probably worth listening to these, even getting through some of the weaker stuff. So I think I will wrap that up there. Any of these that I've talked about, or the Fourth Doctor audio adventures in general, have you heard of them? What ones do you like? What are your thoughts on these particular ones? Or whatever else you want to toss my way? Drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. A whole bunch of stuff you can do because there's buttons and there's links, including one to my Patreon where you may have noticed, I mentioned it, you get to vote on what Big Finish stories I do and things along those lines. So give that a look if you feel like it. If you don't worry. There's other links you can check out. If you don't even want to look at them, don't sweat that either, because at the end of the day, you're the council, I just run the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned.